This is a first of its kind. We have two tech giants, obviously the hometown heroes, FreightWaves, and we have DAT here with us. We're excited to bring you this great debate, and it's not all just for show. You, the audience, once again, are going to get the chance to pick the winner, and instant-ish gratification because we'll announce that winner at the end of show today. You don't have to wait for tomorrow. The other exciting thing about this is that the winner of our great debate today will get to choose a charity of their choice, and FreightWaves SONAR will be making a $10,000 donation to that charity. So all of your votes right here, and all of you folks watching at home on our live stream, your votes matter too. They will quite literally decide some future-changing money for some of these folks. So without further ado, in this corner over here on my left, we have the constant contrarian, the sometimes a little down in the dumps is the recession of reality, Ken Adamo, who is Chief of Analytics over at DAT. Let's bring him out. And then over here on my right, Babu at the front. Okay, getting rough with it, Dooner. Come on. Give him a round of applause. Over here on my right, welcome to the stage, the Sultan of SONAR, the purveyor of the freight word boggle, as my left side likes to call it here, the one, the only, our head of freight market intelligence, Strickland from FreightWaves SONAR. Bring him on out. The cowbell, I love it. More cowbell for Zach. And then to wrap it all up, our lovely, always emulated but never repeated, please welcome to the stage, the one, the only George Abernathy in his referee shirt. We've got a whistle, we've got the flag. Let's hear it for everyone, guys.
Bring them out, hey. Bring them out,
You ready?
Bring them out, hey.
Come on.
Bring them out.
Let's go. 3:40 in the afternoon. Something should have kicked in by now. I mean, Driegert, Fuller, these two, you guys are you're getting some real treats. So, well, you know what? It's probably appropriate. It's a little bit like UFC. Thank you to Jim Allen for taking great pictures of me. I think it's time to say, let's get ready to. Okay, no, we can't say that because that means the buffers are going to get paid, and if we do that, then Spencer gets really mad at me. So, you guys didn't say that. This is the great debate. Thank you to Ken Adamo and to Strickland for doing this. Some of you may remember that, and first and foremost, thank you to Kaylee. Make sure you vote. You're paying attention. You're paying great attention. I want you to vote. I do have in my pocket a flag that could be thrown, as any referee will, or a whistle. He's waiting momentarily so that the person in back that has their ear on the is going to go, oh dear God, why did he do that? So anytime I throw the flag and blow the whistle, it means that they're filibustering. That's really the only thing that I'm going to do today, is if they're trying to take up all of the oxygen in the room. We only have 38 minutes and 46 seconds according to the countdown clock right now. I'm going to stay out of the way unless they're trying to filibuster. And both of these folks, if you read their stuff, have the ability to go very deep, very intellectual, very interestingly on the topics that we're going to talk about today. So I'm pleased to be here. This is my fourth time being the referee of the great debate. This harks back to when Zach and Craig Fuller started at a FreightWaves conference, the bull and the bear. And what people figured out was it was the bull and the slightly less bullish, but fantastic debate. Then we invited Noel Perry of Truck Stop fame to be with Zach. Pretty sure that Zach won that one, but Noel came out firing and punching, and we're really thrilled to have two people on the stage that in my role now with companies like Emerge, we buy data from both of these companies. So I'm impartial. I have a whistle that will only be used sparingly. But let's just put this into perspective, how important this is. We've got the SEC and the Big Ten represented up here, ladies and gentlemen. And for those of you who are local around here and think that the SEC, everything that in the SEC orbits around something called Athens, you're wrong. There's something up in Knoxville that is special, and Zach is one of those. And we've got somebody who's representing the Ohio State University and is ready to dot the I on the script, Ohio. There we go. All right. So both sides have something to be excited about. So I'm going to start off with, as those who know me realize, I tend not to have very much original thought. I tend to steal from others. So I'm going to steal something from somebody way smarter than I am, somebody who's been incredibly impactful and successful in this industry, a guy by the name of Jack Holmes, who's our chairman at Emerge and was the chairman and CEO at the artist formerly known as UPS Freight. So let me start with describing the freight clock. If it's midnight, or 12 o'clock, let's call it, on the freight clock, that means it's really tight, right? It's very tight. For a carrier, really tight, we're loving it. We've got power. We've got the ability to determine our destiny. 6 o'clock, shippers are probably a little bit happier. So you can see that noon and or 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock. So first question, and by the coin flip out back, the Big Ten won. And so I'm going to go over to Mr. Adamo and ask you, what time is it on the freight clock right now?
So there's an interesting thing about a clock, right? So a clock turns like this. And most of you have probably seen a sine curve, right, that goes up and down. Well, the interesting thing is if you put that clock in motion over time, it actually makes a sine curve, right? And one of those sine curves that's very popular in freight was made popular by the best Pickett in logistics, which is Chris Pickett, is the coyote curve.
Oh, that's a shot at FreightWaves, but I won't throw the flag. Go ahead.
Being number 2 behind Chris isn't a bad thing. So the coyote curve is a measure of year-over-year changes in freight, right? Freight rates, freight capacity, however you want to think about it. So I think when you really look at it like that, my answer would be close to 7:30. And I will say, though, the hands of that clock are getting longer. And what does that mean? The cycle is getting much more volatile. The last 3 cycles have all been more volatile than the cycle before.
Interesting.
So if you think about that outstretched hand making a cycle bigger and bigger, the peaks are getting higher, the valleys are getting lower. It's also spinning a little bit faster, but I don't want to filibuster and get called for a foul. So I'll say 7:30 with longer hands.
Interesting. Thank you, Ken. Zach, pretty interesting thing thrown out there. Earlier, later, about the same? What do you think?
We're earlier by a good hour. The coyote curve, it's cute. It's based off of some spot market information. Great, very one-sided, lopsided. I will lean on the tender rejection index in my world because it's very pure. It biases towards almost nothing. It is measuring one thing and one thing alone, and that is the rejection rate from a carrier to a shipper. Very low means that carriers don't have a lot of optionality. They're not being strained at this point, and it's roughly right around 4%, 4.5%, which for anybody that follows FreightWaves will know that anything below 5% is very deflationary. It has bottomed out, for the time being it appears, around 2.5%, and it's been slowly rising, but it is slowly rising, and almost imperceptibly so, to the point where 6 o'clock, 6:30, it feels roughly the same. Yes, it's off the bottom, but it hasn't really crept up that much higher.
Ken, and both of you, if you want to, excuse my back, if you guys want to just, feel free to go straight back. I'm just going to ask you, I found Ken's, the longer hands with that greater impact to be something that is interesting. What does your data say about the length of the hands on the clock?
I think.
And remembering that size is everything.
I kind of like the longer hands analogy, except for the fact that I feel like the hands are moving irregularly in the way that, yes, the hands have been longer for a minute, but they're about to shrink dramatically. Once we clear this COVID, post-pandemic, overstimulated recovery, up-down environment, we're about to see the hand shrink back after we clear another cycle. We'll probably see a period where carriers have some leverage back in the market for a period of time, but it will probably not be the 2-year drawn-out thing. It's not going to be regular. Craig and I talked about this earlier on our State of Freight, where if you looked at the period of time, and a lot of us, myself included, grew up in an era of seasonality, of predictability, where the freight market was something that we knew every June it's going to do this, every August, September it's going to do this. You might have a few swing months in there, but it's become, if you look at data over the last 5 to 6 years, it has become an unpredictable, chaotic mess. And I think that we are somewhat regular over the last 2 years in the way that we've seen this COVID cycle, these 2 super long COVID-influenced cycles really influence things, but we're about to clear that, and I think we're going to enter a realm of a little bit more chaotic, but shorter cycles.
Yeah, I think the thing to think about, though, right, if you go back a little further, right, if you go back 15 years, not the last cycle, so that would basically give you 4 freight cycles. Freight cycles are about 4 years in length. I think we'd both agree on that, 2 years up, 2 years down, give or take. What you'll see, though, is that clock, the hands, it's actually remarkable, the constant rate at which they've been growing. Right? This cycle was predictably more volatile than the cycle before it, was predictably more volatile than the cycle before that. And what's really interesting is that the cycles are becoming more volatile at a rate roughly half the rate that the overall market is growing, which I think, that's much more applicable in the trough, which is what we're feeling right now. The peaks are much harder to fit into that paradigm. But on a trough over trough perspective, the cycle is becoming predictably more volatile along a market that's growing, again, over the long arc of time, 15 to 20 years or so. We'll call it 3% at mean and 2 to 3% on a trough-to-trough basis.
Volunteer? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some truth in that period, but I do think that we are in a world like this whole concept of predictability. Like, we all want to fit things into a space that we know and are comfortable with. Makes us feel safe. It's a psychological process that we go through. We want to live in a world that we understand cleanly, when the reality that we've been presented with is something that none of us really want to address. And that's the fact that we're living in a world that we don't know what's about to happen next. And yes, there's cyclicity. It's cyclical. It's been a long day. There's still a lot of cycle left to move in this up and down. But I think that breaking free from this idea of regularity in our cycles is going to be something that we have to get a little bit more used to. Craig and I talked about this with the rise of brokerages in the freight market. The speed with which information flows, the speed of negotiation has been increasing over the last 5 to 10 years because there's a lot of people negotiating now. There's a lot more people really trying to move that rate in the direction they want it to move into. And in that, if you look at the stock market, which is exactly what happened in the stock market, it's almost impossible. Even the financial people that do this for a living almost have no idea. You give them 12 months, they have no idea what to call next. And I think we're going to have to increasingly get used to the concept that the freight market is moving in a direction that the stock market is moving.
Is it therefore we should cut this off now because we won't be able to take data and be in any level of predictability, have a predictability?
I mean, if you use their data,
is sick. Oh, okay. Oh.
I'm kidding.
Okay. Well, I'll say a word that Zach can't say right now. Is cyclicality? There you go. You're welcome. It's that UT Knoxville degree that's really holding you down.
I'm not from Boston.
Hence, you say UT Knoxville if you really want to get into the skin of somebody from UT, because living in Chattanooga, there's a UTC, but we all know that the real UT is in Knoxville. So his UT Knoxville degree seems to think that cyclicality is going away. Is that even in the vicinity of something that's possible?
So I think Zach's right, and human behavior is difficult to predict in the micro, right? When you're driving down the road, is it impossible to predict if that Kia Soul is going to cut into your lane and knock you off the road? That's impossible to predict, right? But what we can predict is, since deregulation, what has happened? Let's start with rates are high. What do truckers do? They buy more trucks. Rates are high. They're going to be high forever. I'm going to buy this truck. I'm going to be a king or a queen. Then they buy too many trucks. What happens when you have too many trucks? The rates go down. What happens when the rates go down? They're not in their truck anymore. What happens when they're not in their truck anymore? Rates go up. What happens when rates go up? I'm going to buy a whole bunch of trucks, right? So this cycle is what's been happening since deregulation. And I agree. It was muted then. I think seasonality was more dominant. But over time, with access to information, I think just to build upon Zach's point, not disagree with it, most big trucking companies have brokerages now. A lot of big shippers have brokerages. So this access to the spot market is more fluid, which I think drives up the frequency and amplitude of the cycle. But at its core, I still believe that's the fundamental driver behind it, is this sort of elephant versus goldfish of truckers adding capacity and then adding too much, and then we're here. Between 6 and 7:30, we're still on time for dinner, right?
I want to answer the question, George, when you say, well, is data less relevant because of this? Actually, it makes data a necessity in this environment, because if we were in a predictable pattern, a regular world as we grew up with in the 2010s for about 5-6 years, you don't really need it as much, because you know what's about to happen. I mean, if anybody,
I got to throw a flag. Sorry about that. I probably blew it a little too fast. There's a few of us that grew up before 2010. And I'm precariously close to an ageism thing here, but I'm gonna dock you 5 yards. You still have the ball, but I'm just saying, growing up in 2010, it's okay.
I apologize, George. I did misspeak a little bit there when I'm talking about growing up in 2000.
Thank you very much. I understand what you were saying now.
Is that we kind of have this recency bias. We think that
there you go.
We know, we experience this period of time and it becomes our normal. And I'm not going to use that new normal stuff out here, because I don't even know what that means. But that's the period that we relate to. We understand it. It feels good. If you don't have information now, though, if you think that you are having success in a market that is solely based on your performance, how do you know if you don't have information? And then what's going to prevent you from seeing that train coming down the road? No pun intended for the truckers in here. But the idea that information becomes less relevant when you have a chaotic world is the absolute opposite. Is that you have to have information then to function in it.
Well, it's interesting. So let me leapfrog on something you described in the supply and demand as more capacity came in the end of 2021. I think the spot market was in the $4 plus range, something like that. Even a jamoke like me could run a truck. No offense intended to trucking companies, because you are way smarter than I am running them. I could run a trucking company. I could run a truck at $4 a mile and probably figure out a way to make money. Fast forward 6 months later, I'm at $2 a mile for 2 years now? Isn't it like $1.99 or $2 right now in the vicinity of? Why is it taking so long? Doesn't it seem, and maybe it's the longer arms, why is it taking so long for capacity to leave this market?
So I think there's a couple reasons. One, I think we have to contextualize. The reason I'm not as bearish about this being freight Armageddon is that if you hauled the same amount of freight, so let's just say this cycle started in May of 2020, right around when the pandemic really caught up. If you hauled 10 loads a month, every single month, market average loads, this would still be, like, by leaps and bounds, the most profitable freight cycle you've ever lived through, right? The COVID highs are still much, 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 much higher, and both data points would show that, than the COVID lows. So I think they kept on to a lot of that money that they had. We talked to a lot of truckers that they didn't spend any of that nest egg knowing that this was coming. I also think I'm guilty of this. I don't know if Zach would consider himself guilty of it. I think we look at the point, right? We look at the point we're making, which is rates are $2.99 a mile. Mm-hmm. But behind all of those averages are really wide, and in many cases, vibrant distributions, right? So if you own your own truck, and you've been in the business for a while and you're good at running your business, you're out there profitable, right? There's 315,000, I believe, interstate motor carrier authorities out there right now, as of this morning, operating just fine. About 37,000 of them went away since October of 22 due to COVID. So it's not like they're all gone, right? So I think it's a wide distribution. I think the current environment has pushed a lot of that one tail out of the market, but it's kept a lot of the other ones who otherwise may have exited sooner. And again, as long as they weren't sports betting and, I don't know, taking crazy vacations. They should have some of that money. But right now, it is about gone. So I think that's why we're on that hairy edge of equilibrium right now.
Interesting. Well, the sports betting analogy is good because as I was looking on the FreightWaves app, you guys on the sports betting app were basically even money. So this was the bias towards this being a FreightWaves conference, I think the bias towards length of time and tenure of DAT and all that, I think we've got a pretty level playing field going so far. So Zach, speak to that. Are you in agreement with the reasoning behind why is it taking so long for capacity to come out of the market? Is there something else beyond that? And if you had been told 2 years ago, in June of 22, that we'd still be sitting at $2 a mile in the spot market, you would have said, well, there's clearly still capacity, so my expectation would be that some level of volume wouldn't have been there for some reason. But that's not true. We've worked through inventory. We've done all those things. Why are there still so many trucks out there?
I agree with Ken on the fact that there was so much influx of capacity. Like, that's undeniable. And then there was a big cash flow that came out of this extremely profitable environment. That's undeniable. You cannot fault that. You look at any of the big company earnings reports, large carriers, they did exactly what they should have done during the COVID environment. I believe Heartland, during the end, got actually criticized for selling over market equipment at the end of their, at the end of 2022, when the pandemic, or the end of 21, sorry, when the pandemic was starting to run on its last leg. Now, there is something in addition to that huge amount of wealth and stuff generated, because if you look at the earnings report now, and the one thing I will disagree on is, I don't know that you would ask any carrier, any 300,000 of them, if they're doing well or not, any of them would say, I'm doing great. I think most of them feel some level of distress because you look at the financial statements of a lot of the publicly traded people, and they are just not doing as well. They're certainly not doing as well as they were. Are some of them operating profitably? Sure. But it's not where they want to be in the context of things. The next part, and I already got a little heads up on this from Craig in our State of Freight, so I'm going to relay some of what he said because I agree with this concept tremendously, is that the influence of brokerages is much higher now than it has been. It wasn't just trucks and carriers that grew during the pandemic. It was brokerages. Digital broker was a huge buzzword in the front edge of the pandemic era. Lots of people went out and got their own brokerages going. Technology was booming as well. So there's all sorts of other things outside of the direct influence of people going out and just simply buying trucks that, with a short-sighted venture in a banknote from somebody who was just not worried about the long-term future. It's also the fact that you have the broker connecting the small carrier and the owner-operator to larger shippers much more efficiently and effectively. And that's allowing them to utilize their equipment, maintain that cash flow, pay that banknote every month because they now have a sales force that didn't exist before. One of the hardest things for the owner-operators to do is source new and unique freight because they're driving all day. So that, to me, is one of the biggest driving forces in keeping these people on board, as well as the obvious large amount of cash that I think $4.6 trillion of stimulus went into the economy. We're still churning through a lot of that, not just in transportation, but all over it.
So thank you, Zach. So Ken, as you think about that in the way that those individual or smaller owner-operators are getting access to, at the same time, and I'm wondering is this helping, hurting a cause? You have companies that are helping to procure freight more efficiently today. And is there a trend of some sort to move freight that is spot today into contract, right? And we all can quote that contract isn't a legal term, et cetera. Are you seeing any trend towards that occurring? What are shippers trying to eliminate? Unpredictability. And that speaks to getting as much of their freight as possible out of the contract market, onto dedicated, into private, et cetera. Are you seeing any any of that procurement impact happening?
Yeah, so folks less familiar with our industry don't quite understand a very important aspect, which is when a broker wins a bid from a large shipper, the overwhelming majority of that freight is covered on the spot market still, right? So if you look at any of the publicly available firms or you look at any of the data, it would suggest that most contractual freight on the sell side still gets moved spot on the buy side. But what happened during COVID? Routing guides failed, and shippers were forced to add more brokers to their routing guide. We did a ton of research on this, and broker, even 10 years ago, in a shipper's primary routing guide was a 4-letter word. They're there in force now. When I was in the industry, it was like a 5+1 strategy. 5 big asset base, 1 broker. You're seeing a lot more brokers in the primary routing guide. When they win more contract freight, that actually increases the amount of spot freight. And since contract is so much bigger than spot, it almost has a 10-to-1 leverage.
Right.
So what we saw during COVID was about 200 basis points, bips, for those, in the finance up and up. But about 2 percentage points of increase of broker share of contract freight. That's a lot of volume, right? So that's a lot more volume that's available out there for the small carrier by virtue of them dealing with brokerages. I also think shippers are able to access the spot market more freely, but I think a lot of us have talked to shippers a lot over the years. They'd rather pay a little bit more than deal with the inconvenience of the spot market in many cases. That's not so much the case for, like a Pepsi Logistics is a very spot market forward entity within the Pepsi brand.
Right.
And others are going that direction. But I still think it's predominantly brokers winning more contract freight.
Interesting. So Zach, let me expand on that. Dig back into that background when you were, pricing freight. You were having to think about, is this going to get covered 6 months, 12 months from now? Last thing I want to have happen is a routing guide to fail. Put the shipper hat on today. And, bid season still exists, but bids are going on constantly now. Where would you be thinking? And let's just assume you're your average stout shipper with dry van freight. You're in the running every year for shipper of the year, etc. What would you be doing today in your strategy to try to deliver? And let's say your fiscal's July 1 through June 30th. Where would you be setting your percentages on contract, your percentages on spot? And is that different than what you would have been thinking a year ago?
Oh, 100%. That is a great question. I did actually source freight.
You hear that? He said it was a great question. Just want to make sure that they're just trying to suck up. So do not allow that to influence you at all. But go ahead.
I actually did in my previous life manage contract. We were an LTL provider, and I was responsible for, in part, of managing some of those procurement initiatives with the carriers and fleets. And right now would absolutely terrify me because there is a level of comfortability in the industry and the space with a lot of the rates being on the floor, on the ground. There's still companies out there, and I would still get that pressure from my CFO to target cost reduction, because that's what you do. It's a cost center from a shipping perspective. You target your costs that you feel like you can trim, and if I got 10% last year, why can't I get another 8? If I don't know the industry, that is, and I don't have any information or know how cycles work. But the lesson here is that even if the market does not turn violently over the next 12 months, the risk of the market turning violently is only increasing from this point forward. Aside from an economic collapse, in which case we're all out in the ocean, the strategy you have to implement at this point is service. You have to prioritize service and making sure, maybe September's not going to be that bad. Maybe we get into November and things are still okay. But what if I'm a retailer and I need to make sure that I have capacity in that fourth quarter without fail? And guess what? I'm keeping my inventory levels much tighter than they were. So my logistics team and my warehouse managers are like, I'm doing great, keeping my costs down. You're getting your capacity, your sourcing capacity, no problem, at a great rate. Keep on doing that. All of a sudden, demand hits. And all it has to do is hit another industry outside of a cycle, outside of that predictable, comfortable world that we lived in to disrupt my world. Produce season, one of the biggest influencers and lessons in the industry about how you don't have to have anything to do with produce season to feel the effects of it from a shipping perspective. And so in my mind, I'm going to take an increase potentially at this point in time to make sure that I am absolutely not on the bottom of anybody's customer list. If I am sitting around spot market rate levels, I am at the highest risk for any of this service failure. And even if I feel like I'm going to make it till next May, next June, the chances of me making it all the way through are much, much less than they were this time a year ago. Interesting.
Thank you for that. So Zach is attempting to cover his ass and make sure that he keeps his job, right? I mean, he's a conservative type, always been a little bit ashamed of where he went to school, all of that. What do you think? You think he's thinking correctly? Would you try to take advantage of the market at 7:30?
Yeah.
If he's that conservative, 7:30 makes it feel like he might be right. You thinking the same way?
Let me go back a little bit. So I think what generated most of my sizzle reel that FreightWaves put together in advance of this was I'm employee of the decade because I didn't listen to the doomsday in March of 2021. I am the greatest pricing person to ever work at a brokerage or a carrier. I have secured the bag for those folks. So I'm a little less worried. I'm a little more comfortable. They upgraded me to a corner office. Things are good. I got sparkling water, not still. But I think, honestly, I can't disagree too much with where we are today. I worked a long career in pricing before coming to the other side of the industry. This is the absolute scariest time to price freight. And I think, like, if you've gleaned anything in the 30 minutes we've been up here, I like life's little anecdotes. I was on the golf course a week and a half ago with two brokerages of drastically different sizes. And this conversation was happening. How are you thinking about it? Certainly no antitrust conversations, Sherman, wherever you are. And the conversation became, if I price this aggressive, I can't cover the freight, I have to turn it back. And the big broker looked and said, you don't turn back freight. And the conversation ensued around, that's why you see so much of a churn out of small brokerages during these cycles, because they can't ride the ebbs and flows with the float that a mega or a top 100 brokerage would have. So different strategies depending on different size. If I was a mega, I'd be loading up right now. I'd be trying to get contract freight, get it in the routing guide, get it instantiated before peak this fall. If I was a smaller broker, I'm probably being a lot more tepid in my response, trying to make some magic happen in the spot market right now and win bids where I'm comfortable and have good relationships.
Interesting. So, Zach, you've heard this from me 100 times. I'm going to still say it again. You put 10 economists in a room, you're going to get 11 different answers. So I'm going to ask you one of them. They're sort of macro-ish type questions, but is there something looming out there that you're thinking could be the impact that it's going to cause that turn that you're thinking that you should protect yourself from? Is there something out there? I'm not asking you to predict the next black swan, white swan. I can't remember which one is the one that is unpredictable, but is there something out there looming, or do you think that it's simply prudent to think the way you're thinking?
I mean, it's certainly prudent. There are a number of things. The world is a terrifying place. I don't know if any of y'all stayed and listened to Craig talk today on the state of freight, but I literally got nervous listening to all the potential pitfalls of the next year or so. You've got political stuff. You've got geopolitical conflict running amok. We've got hurricane season. I mean, Kaylee Nix, if you get her out here to talk about she's a meteorologist, for those of you who don't know. It is bathwater in the Atlantic Ocean right now. It's 90 degrees plus around Miami. All it takes is one of those infrastructure destroying events to really send the freight market into some sort of turmoil. And the fact is we're supposed to see several potential landfalling ones. Now, they have to hit the right spots. I know FEMA has gotten loads better than they were as a person that used to run that hurricane freight back in the day. But that doesn't change the fact that what if you shut down a city infrastructure like Hurricane Harvey did, and you shut down it happened this January. For a brief period of time, about a week, but shipping schedules were offset. And guess what? With them keeping lower inventory levels as well, much tighter than they were even in 2019, it is an inherent risk that one of those shippers, all it's going to take is a shipper or two, because we've seen it happen. It's all at once. The weather event that happened during COVID that was kind of masked when Texas froze its power grid and everything went dark, everything was actually kind of smoothing out at that point. And then all it took was that one little disruption to put doubt in a couple of people's heads, and all at once, here they go, opening the floodgates of shipping. Shipping Armageddon continues for another 12 months-ish. And then what happens in March of 2022? They stop shipping once they see, whoops, too much freight. So it can happen quickly because it's a herd mentality. When everybody's competing for the same resources and potentially getting fired for not having TVs on the shelves or available to ship in December, that's the thing, that to me is the most inherent looming risk. It's always in the freight market, but as capacity's leaving, we're going to be much further up that clock this time come peak season.
Can we get a hurricane to hit Michigan? Is that possible?
So does Hurricane Zach scare you enough that if you were back when you were predicting or having to figure out where freight was going to go, would that make you, if you were a shipper, drive your inventory levels up? Where would you be at this point with regards to thoughtfulness? And I'm trying to give all the shippers in there a little bit of free counsel here because this would normally cost you big bucks.
So I mean, I think the tropical events or those exogenous events like Ukraine, they're catalysts. And catalysts largely speed up an underlying reaction that's going to happen anyway, right? So I think what happened in 17 was going to happen regardless of the HI storms. We had Harvey and Irma. It was ELD driven, right? There was going to be this massive decrease in driver efficiency and churn and all of that was going to cause this disruption. I think it pulled it forward and it made it worse. You mentioned the polar vortex and then Delta variant, right? That kind of 1-2 punch that happened that spring. So that's hard to plan around.
Right.
I think the underlying market conditions need to be such that that's what kicks it in the butt, for lack of a better term. I think there are probably more systemic things looming. I think if the FMCSA does what the FMCSA will typically do and screw everything up with speed limiters, I'm sorry if you're here, FMCSA. Then that like if they set that limit at 63 or 64, you're probably looking at ELD Part 2.
Right.
I think AB5 going national. Those are some bigger systemic things that would be a little bit more concerning. I think we could probably metabolize a hurricane, unless it was like a whopper, right? Like a Andrew-esque thing in that kind of armpit of North South Carolina, Florida. I don't see it catalyzing a huge recovery.
Right.
It could, but I don't know.
Zach, would you increase given the potential for these catastrophics? Would you be increasing if you were a shipper? Would you be increasing those inventory levels?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, even if you have to think about it in terms of missed revenue, missed demand. That costs you way more than holding an extra certain, and again, this is very general. It's different for every company, I know that. Inventory costs vary pretty wildly, but you have to think about it in terms of what if I am wrong and I'm missing, and all of a sudden there isn't an extra truck available anymore. What do you miss out on? It's not just that you missed today's revenue, but you may have lost a customer for the next 3 years. To get a customer back, the cost of customer acquisition, everybody in the room can relate to that figure. The cost of customer acquisition is expensive. It's far more expensive than a 3% increase on your transportation spend. And that's something that you have to keep in mind as this is going on. It's not necessarily that we can predict the Hurricane Harvey event or whatever black swan, if we call it that anymore. They have become a thing. We're getting closer to the end of the cycle. We're going to have market sensitivity increasing. It's just the smart thing to do when you talk about the service failure aspect component is way more expensive than kind of making sure you're just not sitting on the floor.
So we've only got go ahead.
I think I don't disagree with what the right thing to do is. I just think it's a hard thing to do internally.
Yeah.
I think, like I personally picked on carriers a little bit with their short-term memory, right? Who read the dozens of articles during COVID of like just-in-time is dead and just-in-time, right? Just-in-time inventory is dead. We're going to carry safety stock forever. No one's going to be caught without inventory again. But that budget cycle comes up and it's like, wow, I could probably cut out. And interest rates are high. Inventory is very expensive.
Yep.
Interest rates are high. So I could probably cut it a little thin. Nothing's going to happen again. It's a once every 100-year event. Statistically speaking, we have 99 years, right? It's never going to happen. I'll be dead. But I think it's just hard to make the case to invest when interest rates are so high that I think they should, but they likely won't, just to clarify what I think might be happening out there.
Appreciate that. All right, we're coming down to the finish line. I think that the Big Ten and the SEC have been really well represented, and I appreciate both of you doing this and grappling it up a little bit. I will ask one final question that while there's money involved to charities based on your input, including those folks who are live streaming this, but we'll figure out a way to make this worth something downstream if the folks at FreightWaves are nice enough to invite us back to do the great debate numero dos, or number 2, 12 months from now. What time will the freight clock say that it is? Because there's people out there right now thinking to themselves, the DAT data, the FreightWaves data, though coming from different sources, are both extraordinarily valuable. That's why people like Emerge buy both of them. What time will it be this time next year? Zach, I'll let you lob in first. And remember, it's being recorded. We're paying attention, and I have the memory of someone who will remember what your number is.
George, I'm recorded so much at this point that I'm always talking like I'm being recorded. So it is this time next year. If I were to put a linear regression on it in terms of contract spot rate relationship / tender rejection rate movement, we're looking at about a 9 o'clock, about a 9 o'clock on the clock. The world does not operate in a linear regression. I will put that in there. But a 9 o'clock would be the safe bet. If I really wanted to put money on it, though, I would push it up an hour, 10 o'clock.
Interesting. Interesting. So Zach wants to make a wager if anybody's interested afterwards. Mr. Adamo, what time will it be this time next year?
Yeah, I thought Zach and I were running about an hour and a half ahead, but he hedged there at the end. Yeah, I'm at about 10:30 to torture the analogy a bit. I think we'll have some distance between year-over-year rates. They're going to be lapping some pretty poor year-over-year comps as we sit here today. Again, I think there's more upside than there is downside. I think if we're below 9 o'clock, there's probably some bigger systemic problems in the economy than there's more reasons to believe it's closer to noon than closer to 9 or 6. If we go backwards, we're all screwed. So no one will be there to show you the recording.
That's a great point. So please thank both of the combatants today. Well done, guys.
All right, guys, come together. Everybody's
Sure.
got to come together.
I want it to come together.
We got to shake some hands. We got to
Go right ahead. Yeah,
put it up.
Shake the hand. Well done. Look, do it again. It's almost like, this is like Apollo Creed. This is okay. Good.
He dies.
There we
Thank
go.
you, Jim. He dies at the end of the movie. So somebody.
Spoiler alert.
So make sure you vote. All right.